Hey everybody, welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation exploring the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we're coming to you with a special series from Davos for World Economic Forum 2025. We're here in front of the Congress Center, in front of the mountains, in front of the town. Beautiful day. And I'm joined here by Denelle Dixon, who is CEO of the Stellar Development Foundation. Denelle, it's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's so beautiful out here.
It's amazing. Amazing to have you here. So tell us a bit more about yourself and your work in the open source software community. You've been a veteran of a lot of battles, Mozilla, some other marquee names. Tell us a bit about how you got into the open source software world. I'd love to dive into your work with Stellar.
Yeah, great. So I went to Mozilla. It was a really long time ago now, but I worked there for 9 years, and I was the COO, and I also ran the business side, some of the product stuff, and the operations components, and really, that's how I became involved. Before that, I had been at Yahoo and some other tech companies, but really not focused as much on open source. But because of Mozilla's the maker of the Firefox browser, really focused on the open source components, and then obviously just the open web. So spent a bunch of time advocating for the open web, and then sort of grew up in it at that point, like really thought like, God, this is just the way that we should be taking software development, because you have the many instead of the few that are building software, and you have ideas from all over the world. And so it's a pretty special thing to be involved in open source. And we did a ton of policy work at Mozilla, focused on open source and also just the open web. And that sort of leaned into my work at the Stellar Development Foundation, where now I have this trifecta, which is what I also had when I was at Mozilla, of tech, policy, and business, but all focused around open source software, which is pretty remarkable.
Amazing. And maybe talk a bit about some of the use cases you guys have really been pushing at Stellar. I think most people would associate Stellar with payments and remittances and cross borders and all this type of things. And I know that's one of the prime use cases. Right. I know you guys have been leaning a lot into tokenization lately as well. Maybe let's talk a bit about kind of the payment side, what's been going on there over the years, and then we can lean into the tokenization angle.
Sure. I think, the Stellar network is really it's really about asset issuance and payments. And it's built in there. There's network controls that are built in to allow assets that are issued to have, you can auth require, you can do KYC at different moments. So from an asset issuance standpoint, it's a really amazing, there's tools that are built in that make it really amazing for the asset issuer. Then that leans into payments really well, because we believe that payments should be made by using stablecoins. And when you think about stablecoins and these assets that are issued out there, then you can actually leverage those for payments. And so we've done a ton of work to make payments really be streamlined and operational and really efficient on Stellar. And so that was sort of the genesis of it, like asset issuance and payments is how we thought about the Stellar network. And then it's now morphed into many other things, but payments is still a core focus. And mostly it's because Jed had this view, Jed McCaleb, who's the founder of the Stellar network, had this view that money should move like email. I know everybody talks about it like that now, but at the time it was like a very forward-thinking view. And when you think about money moving like email, it's really about payments. That's the outcome of what you have. Like, yes, you want to hold, you want to store value, but what do you want to do with it? You want to buy things. You want to be able to send value to your friends and family. You want to be able to, cross-border, no matter where you're at in the world, be able to access it. And that's why there was a big focus around payments.
And it's interesting you bring that up, because I think 2025 really seems to be the year where the narrative is perhaps catching up with the tech on some of this stuff. Like, this tech has existed for a while, and people have been kind of banging on the doors, like saying like, hey, we have the tech to be able to make money move like email, right? And then now it seems like the world is finally catching up to this realization that, hey, like this is actually perhaps a better solution.
That was sort of the fault of it's an interesting comment to think about it, because the tech has been there. Hasn't been a lot of UX design until probably the last 2.5 years to make it really simple. It was actually kind of hard. If I think about when I first came in 2019, it was way more complicated. And so once we got UX involved, it was a lot easier. But really the reason why that is, if you think about the early days of the web, and there was so much really interesting technology that was out there, but then on top of the tech stack, built all these amazing companies, all the, the ones that you know about today. Websites came out, and it was like, I can't remember, I used to know the stat of the number of websites that grew in the early days of the web on each year. And it was astronomical in terms of what was out there. The difference then and the tech stack is not what anybody talked about anymore, right? The tech stack was sort of there, and it was built on, and it was grown on, and everything was like amazing in terms of the top layers. But what we spent a bunch of time doing in crypto and blockchain is really focusing on the tech. And then, of course, we have the secondary market. And so that sort of took over. And the stuff that was built on top of it didn't really get the shine until now. So I love that now we do see like payments, and we see, we focus a lot on aid. We focus a lot on making sure that there's payroll and there's opportunity for gig workers to get paid. So bulk disbursements, all those things now are like really getting to shine because we're no longer so focused on the tech. We have UX design, and the secondary market isn't really our focus anymore.
Maybe let's double click on just some of these use cases that you mentioned. The paying gig workers in other countries or contract workers in other countries, things like aid, things like just cross-border remittances, cross-border kind of B2B payments. Maybe talk a bit about what are some of these use cases that you guys are maybe seeing some traction with on Stellar, and maybe what are you maybe expecting to see more of in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, velocity of the assets is the most important thing from our standpoint. I know a lot of people focus on volume, but volume means that people are just like holding the assets and not doing anything with them. We love to see velocity. We like to see those assets move because it demonstrates that people are using the network for its value. Aid is a really phenomenal one. The UNHCR and other organizations actually deliver aid into Ukraine, Argentina, several other countries that they're out there focused on. And the reason why that's valuable to them isn't just because it's fast. It's also because it saves them so much money. I think the UNHCR has delivered $5 million of aid into Ukraine, and they've saved $12 million by using Stellar.
Oh, wow.
And that's a pretty
just
remarkable.
On the transaction fees and the
transaction fees, but also like the people, because think about the way that cash is normally distributed. You have to have people on the ground making sure that the cash is safe and secure, and then also distribute it to the individuals. That stuff doesn't need to happen. So I love that part of it. And so that's one area. But I also think that one of the things that we forget a lot of times where we sit, I happen to sit in the United States, is how complicated it is sometimes to bring money into a continent or I'm thinking Africa, so I'm thinking the whole continent. But if you think into a country, it's really hard for people to export their talent and to be able to get paid for that talent. So think gig workers, or you think people who are artists and they're exporting their talent, or people who are making movies or doing music, and it's really hard for them to get paid. Because in Ghana, for example, they can't receive US dollars, and they also don't have US dollar bank accounts. So even if they were up on YouTube, for example, it's hard for them to get paid.
Right.
So really, there's some really amazing uses that we see happen now where people are using and creating those US dollar backed, the virtual bank accounts on Stellar, and then they can actually get paid in US dollars, and the fees are nothing. And before they were, taking off 15, 20% to be able to get the money into the country. So that to me is like a really, really important one. And there's tons of traction there. We see this happening. There's tons of volume there. And then, of course, we see just like the regular uses of sending diaspora, sending money into different countries in Latin America, in South America, on the African continent. And that's huge in terms of the amount of volume there.
And then let's lean into the tokenization use cases. I know you guys have some things in the works with like Franklin Templeton and some other kind of perhaps household names. But I think 2024 is really the year when the tokenization and real world assets really kind of came to be kind of a thing, maybe fulfilling some of the potential that folks had envisioned for a while. But and then I think Stellar has really seems like you guys have really positioned yourselves really as a key player in some of this as an infrastructure player here. Maybe talk a bit about that. Like, what was some of the key wins from 2024, and what are you sort of forecasting for 2025 to keep that momentum going?
Yeah, I think, again, this gets back to those asset controls that are built into the network. And this was something that the community actually really pushed for years ago. If you think about securities, what do you need to be able to do? Clawback functionality. You need to be able to have control of the asset. You need to be able to have the authorization required so that you can't just send the asset to anyone. Lots of these asset issuers want to be able to control the asset. They don't want them to be open and free yet because they're securities. So it's a little different. So when you think about that, like the network was built for that. And these asset controls are built into the network layer. And that's a really important component. And frankly, it's so interesting when I think about Franklin Templeton, 2019 is when Franklin Templeton filed their SEC filing to start building their money market fund on Stellar.
Oh, really?
2019.
Wow.
And it was in November of 2019. And we learned about it because of their SEC filing. So they actually chose Stellar based on the tech, and they did it on their own. And then now, of course, we work really closely with them, and they're trying to push this asset. Benji, and they now are looking to issue outside the U.S. and different jurisdictions, because then this asset can be free, can be available to everyone. And who knows, like it could be also a payment asset at some point. But importantly, why I love asset issuance and why I love the tokenization of real world assets is because it actually, again, gets to the cost saving for the asset issuer, and it opens up access for the user. Because even though you need to purchase a security, you might need to have certain KYC and certain information, so not everyone would be able to do it. originally, to be able to purchase any component of a money market fund at Franklin Templeton, you had a requirement to put like $2,000 in. Now, because they're building on Stellar and because of the ease of use and because of the simplicity of how they just have to look after one network, it's like you can get in at $20. That's crazy huge. So when we think about the value of these tokenized assets, it's a really important piece. So now we're seeing lots of Wisdom Tree. We're seeing lots of other players build on Stellar. I actually think 2025 is going to be the year where we're going to see even more players come into the tokenization space. And I totally welcome it because it's using the tech for a really interesting purpose. And eventually, I think a lot of these assets are going to be those payment assets that we leverage. So they'll be yield-bearing assets that are for payments.
Love that. Love that. Just wrap up here. What are your sort of expectations for this week here in Davos? What are you excited about? What are you looking to achieve?
Well, I love Davos because you get to meet people from all over the world that you would normally not have access to or that you wouldn't know that you wanted to meet with. And so it's just a really great opportunity to be able to take from a policy standpoint, and we spend so much time on policy, to take from a policy standpoint and say like, hey, I want to meet with folks from Southeast Asia, and I really want to understand what they're doing in policy there and how we can help them or how they can help us. So those are things that are super interesting to us. And that's what we spend a bunch of time focusing on the policy side of our work. And then of course, we'd love to meet businesses who are just either building on Stellar or think that Stellar could be interesting for them. So that's kind of what we want to get out of Davos. It's a great experience. I love it here. And I think that it's every year it's different. This year is not like a huge crypto year. I think next year will be.
Amazing. Well, Denelle Dixon, thanks you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. Best of luck this week. Congratulations on a nice couple of years here with the Stellar ecosystem. Wishing you the best of luck in 2025. Thanks everyone for watching here today. We'll be back soon with another interview.